Hello, I am Knick-Knack. Welcome to my nonsense. Today we are going to be putting together a timeline for season 1 of Our Flag Means Death. And the reason we're doing this is because the show is actually pretty clear when you're watching it. Like, there's no confusion about the order of events or anything. But it's not always spelled out too well, the timing of the events, which is to say, we know A happens and then B happens, but we don't know if they're happening a month apart, a week apart, on the same day. So that's what we're going to tackle here today. I did go through and rewatch all 10 episodes with a particular eye towards any clues for the timeline, and I wrote them all down. And I was looking for both clues, like direct clues, things like, obviously if they said a date, but also things like, oh yeah, tomorrow night, past few weeks, that kind of stuff. And also I was looking for indirect clues, what we could kind of infer stuff from. That's going to be stuff like looking at people's clothing, what state is their clothing in? Also, are we changing outfits at all? And also looking at things like looking at the lighting, how is the daylight progressing throughout the episode, phases of the moon, and just the flow of conversations, and just a lot of other stuff like that. And I did, of course, put it all together, kind of figure out roughly what I think the actual timeline looks like once I had all the clues. But I didn't think that would be too fun to just like throw up the actual timeline. Rather, I want to give you guys the authentic experience of what I went through. And we're just going to go episode by episode and for the most part, like event by event, clue by clue, and just start throwing stuff to the wall, see what sticks. If we end up having to move stuff because of later clues, we will move stuff. If our end result is a mess, well, life's a mess too. I think it's appropriate. I assume that this is what creator Dave Jenkins would have wanted, a total mess. And just to be clear, if it's not already clear from my tone, like this is not me like bagging on the show. I'm not like trying to say, oh, logic, plot holes. This is a show that runs very much on emotional truths. The framing and even things that you're seeing on screen are not necessarily reflecting objectively what happened. It's reflecting the emotional truths of the characters in that moment. So we wouldn't necessarily always expect things to come together logically, and it's a valid choice for storytelling, and I think it was the right choice for the show that they're trying to tell. But we're just gonna have some fun here today, looking at it logically and see what we can pop up. Hopefully you guys have fun too. And also, I did want to address if there are any people who are found this video somehow, sitting here watching it, and are not familiar with the show. Our Flag Means Death is a gay pirate rom-com starring, or rather loosely based. And when I say loosely, I mean very loosely based on the real life of Stede Bonnet, gentleman pirate, and Edward Teach, you probably know better as Blackbeard. So Stede Bonnet is our primary protagonist, and he was a wealthy landowner, but found himself to be uncomfortable in a married state for, some mysterious reason. Who's to say why? And so he left his wife and kids. And just to ease your minds, he left them with a lot of wealth and property. Like they're doing okay. Left his wife and kids and ran away to become a pirate. And now Stede doesn't know much about sailing. Doesn't know much about fighting, raiding, pillaging, looting, plundering. Any of that pirate stuff. He's not too up on the skills. What he does know is the whole culture of abuse thing that piracy has going on. Keel haulings, floggings, all that stuff. Not a fan. We don't like that. Rather, Stede on his ship, which ship he actually commissioned and had built himself, he is fostering a real culture of support and caring. You know, he's very concerned about his crew and do they have trauma? Do we need to talk it out? And we love that. This is great stuff. And now, based on that, and based on, you know, the infamous Blackbeard, bloodthirsty, ruthless pirate, you might be thinking, opposites attract, right? And the show does sort of lean into that at first, like very first, but, and mild spoilers, but I would hope that coming into a timeline video, you were expecting spoilers, but starting now, spoilers. So once we do officially actually meet Blackbeard, we find out that Blackbeard is really more of like a role or a persona that Ed puts on. And Ed in reality is more like your burnt out, gifted ADHD kid who is just so fucking tired. And is really just looking for a friend, like someone he can really be himself with and just play and have fun, which is really perfect because Steed is very heavily that autistic, the weird kid who was just always bullied forever. No one ever liked him and is really hoping to finally find some friends, you know, find someone he can be himself with, you know, play and have fun with. So yeah, basically these two weirdos are the same weirdo, which is fantastic. We love that for them. And of course there are a whole lot of other really great characters on the show. Just really great themes, all sorts of really great stuff. Love the show, highly recommend it. Go watch it. You can watch it before you watch the timeline video. You can watch it after the timeline video. I'm not the boss of you, but I highly recommend it. And I could go on and on about, you know, what specifically happens in the show, but I'm going to try to rein it in. We're going to try to move on to the timeline. I will fail. I will continue to over-explain. I also have those autistic ADHD vibes, but we're gonna do our best to stick to timeline stuff only this point forward. And so to get started, I want to just go ahead and label this for you. Obviously, this is kind of a weird-looking timeline. We'll throw some labels up there. Hopefully, that makes it a bit clear what's going on here. So. Our first one here, May of 1717. So this square here is representing the month of May in the year 1717. And that 1717 actually does come from our very first clue. The pilot episode, immediately first thing that starts, you see on screen, black screen, year 1717 pops up. And then May, because like I said, I did kind of figure this out beforehand. So May is where we really want to start here. Get the rest filled out. Okay, so there we go. All the rest of the months are filled out. So we got May, June, July, August. This is not to scale. This is to the scale that works best for me as I'm trying to write stuff up here for you. So July, August, 2 Septembers, 2 Octobers. This last one here is going to represent anything that might happen after October 1717. And this first one up here is going to be representing anything that happens before May of 1717. So hopefully that's pretty clear now, easy to follow. Moving on to our next item, we're going to talk about a couple of actual historical dates we're going to put up there. And I do want to be clear about this show's relationship with historical accuracy, which is we don't know her, except for sometimes she's our girlfriend. And also sometimes we do know her, but we pretend like we don't to make a point, which would be a very toxic relationship if it were a real relationship. But as it's a TV show and an intangible concept, I think we're okay. Again, we're all just here to have fun. David Jenkins School of Historical Accuracy. Still, I'm going to throw a couple of dates up there that we may end up using as anchor points. Maybe not. We'll see how it plays out, yeah? So the first one I'm going to throw up there actually is going to be November 21st, which is the anniversary for Steed and Mary Bonnet. So we got their anniversary up there. The next thing I'm going to throw up there, just for fun, just for kicks, the February 1717 was not a leap year. And fun fact, if you didn't know, if you take a year, if you can divide it by 4, then it was a leap year, and if you cannot, then it wasn't. So 1717, it's not even an even number. Not divisible by 4, not a leap year. So throw that up there. Okay, great, so we got that. Next thing I do want to put up there are going to be the full moons. During this time period, I did kind of mention before that the phase of the moon is going to be one of our clues that we lean on a little bit. So I just want to put those moon phases up there, again, for our reference. So we got the full moons up there. I did write up full moon on this first one. The rest I just put FM. Y'all are smart cookies. You can figure it out. Okay, so we got those full moons. And then one more, it's not really a historically accurate date, but I feel like it kind of falls in the same general like vibe of category. And that is going to be orange season in Florida, so orange picking season. Obviously it does vary a little bit depending on what kinds of orange you're picking, but overall orange season lasts from October to June. So we'll get that after. So we've got orange season, begins in October, ends in June. All right, so those are going to be all of our historically accurate dates, and now we can actually dive into the show itself. Starting with episode 1, the pilot episode. This is the episode where we get to know Steed and his crew and his people positive management style a little bit better. And it's also the episode where he has a meet up with Nigel, his old school chum, Nigel's words, his childhood bully, my words, which turns out, unfortunately for Nigel, Steed ends up murder. I wouldn't call it murder. That implies more of an intention. It's more like manslaughter. Accidentally kills him, hits him with a paperweight. Gravity does the rest, sword through an eye. And they take 2 hostages. So that's our first episode. Now, when we start looking for clues in this episode, we are immediately cheating. And actually our first clue technically comes from episode 9, but it is a clue referencing something that happens in episode 1. We do have Lucius, one of our crewmates, reading from Steed's journal, and he tells us that the raid, the fishermen that they harassed and stole a potted plant from, in this episode happened on June the 3rd. So we're just going to kind of steal that clue to use for here. So we do have a good anchor point to start from. And I'm going to use 2 colors for our clues throughout the episode. Green is going to be for stuff that we do have direct clues for. So again, those are like the dates or like people directly referencing things like tomorrow night or, passage of time in some capacity. Blue is the one we're going to use for things that we figured out via indirect clues. Theoretically, this is so when we look at our timeline, we know that the green things we can feel a bit more confident about, and the blue ones we're kind of guessing a little more. Realistically, I was just trying to get a full rainbow going, and I needed an excuse to use 2 more colors. So, green, June the 3rd, is when they did the raid to steal the plant. So we got that up there. And then I'm also going to put a little gold star next to that date. And the gold star is just to, remind us that this is one where we actually did get that specific date. There are only 2 specific dates mentioned throughout the entire season. And so just remind us this was a specific date. This is an anchor point that we're using. But mostly it's just because you guys wouldn't have seen the yellow pin if I used it. So we had to get yellow in there somehow. Need my rainbow. So June the 3rd, the plants. So now as we start combing through the episode for clues, first one we get is one of our crewmates, Pete, mentioning that weeks we've been out here. And that is also kind of supported by Steve making a comment about how it took them a while to come around to the idea of getting paid a salary. So taking a look back at that word weeks, obviously that's a pretty flexible word. Obviously it means at least 2 weeks. And I would say definitely means less than 8, because at that point you would go into talking about months, and probably means less than like 4 or less. Because again, at that point it is over a month. I mean, that's a little loose, but we don't have a whole lot to go on. So we're going to go with weeks, meaning between probably 2 to 4 weeks, 3 weeks. That's what we're going with. So they've been out there for 3 weeks. June the 3rd, 3 weeks before that would be roughly May 13th, then is when they set sail. The next clue that we get is actually kind of an interesting one, in that we see Steed giving a tour of the ship, but the outfit he is wearing during this tour is a different outfit than what he's wearing throughout the rest of the episode, which does indicate that that tour is actually like a flashback of some sort. And based on that, obviously that means it's happening before today's date, the 3rd, and would have to be happening after the 13th. Like, they need to have left, be on the ship to be having a tour of the ship. And I think it was probably closer to that 13th date, just because it makes sense to give a tour early on and not wait like 2 weeks before, like, hey, by the way, do you want a tour of this facility that you're going to be living in going forward? But I don't think it necessarily happened right on the 13th, because they do look pretty settled. Like, Steed is taking Lucius around, but we have everyone else. They look, like they are already kind of familiar with the amenities. We see them like using the stuff. We see them all playing instruments in the jam room. We see Olu and Pete playing what I assume is pickleball, just based on the court and the rackets that they're using. Anyways, so they do seem to be already at least somewhat familiar, so they're not like brand new. So as a rough guess, we're gonna guess maybe around the 15th is when this tour actually took place. So moving on though, aside from that flashback for the tour, C does wear the same outfit throughout the entire rest of the episode. And so that does seem to imply that this was all happening on the same day. And also that's supported by the fact that these events do flow pretty well into each other. They have the raid with the plant, then they do a review of like feedback, how did we do on the raid, and the feedback comes, we need a flag, and so then they make flags, and then while they're making flags, they're talking about mutiny. So Steve's like, hey, we're gonna go get this ship to stop you guys from mutiny, and then the ship is Nigel's ship. Like it all flows pretty well. Potentially there could be like a couple of days break between some of these events, but that's where we come back to the fact that Steed is wearing the same outfit. And the man has 2 walk-in closets. He's not going to wear the same outfit 2 days in a row. So we can be pretty confident that all of these events are all happening on that same day, June 3rd. And that's also, again, supported by the lighting in the episode. We definitely go from like a full daylight for most of the episode, and then it goes into like a sort of golden hour lighting as they are making their way away from the ship and escaping. And then we go to end on a full nighttime lighting when Steed is reading a bedtime story to his crew. So all that put together, we're definitely looking at all the events of episode 1, aside from the flashback, happening on this same day, June the 3rd. Moving right along into episode 2, A Damned Man, or as I like to think of it, the island adventure, because this is the episode where they run aground at the beginning of the episode and spend the entire episode running around on this island. They lose their hostages, try to find them, and end up instead finding a village of natives. Eventually you find their hostages in the hand of another group of pirates, manage to reclaim one of their 2 hostages before they head on their merry way. And then one thing that happens that they're not aware of, that we in the audience are made aware of, is that group of pirates they got one of their hostage back from are now following them. And the captain of this group of pirates, we have not even met or seen or anything yet, is in fact Blackbeard. Ooh. So our clues in this episode, right off the bat, it is nighttime when they run aground. Like, we see the ship like juddering when it hits the land. And then we go to morning, where Steed is doing his best to just push that ship right back in the ocean. Not getting anywhere, but, you know, commend him for making the effort. And so from that, we can pretty easily assume that, okay, they ran aground at night, and then the following day is when they are now on this island and trying to figure stuff out. Now, when that night and day happened relative to June the 3rd, first of all, relatively minor point, Steed is wearing a different outfit on that night than the night that he was, when he was reading them the bedtime story at the end of episode 1. I mean, it wouldn't have made sense for them to be on the same night anyways, but that does just firmly confirm that for us. It's a different night. So our other clues to then how many nights later was it? First of all, we have the hostages, the state that they're in, and they are looking a little disheveled, like they are getting a bit of sweat ring around their neckline on their shirts. But they're still looking pretty okay. Like, their little powdered weight wigs that they're wearing are all still in pretty good condition. So that kind of implies that maybe it's been a little while, but not too long. We do get a mention that they're starting to smell, but later on that smell is specifically called out as stale urine. So if these guys were not, you know, allowed to go to the bathroom as much as they might like, that stale urine smell probably could develop pretty quickly. Like, that's not a sweat and build up over days and days. So we're thinking that sort of indicates maybe a couple of days at most. Also further supporting that, we have Steed. He is throughout this episode having what appear to be PTSD hallucinations of Nigel. Feeling very guilty over having killed him in some capacity. And the first hallucination that we see him have in this episode, he doesn't look surprised like you would expect if maybe this was the very first hallucination that he had. But at the same time, he kind of goes to like a full breakdown over these hallucinations pretty quickly over the course of this episode. But he is not really even remotely there yet at the beginning of this episode. Like, he's very stressed, but he's not like full breakdown by any means. So between those two, the vibe is, okay, he's definitely had, probably had at least one hallucination before, but he's not had a lot of them. Like, he's maybe had one or two already. Which again does kind of support that's maybe been a couple of days. And then their final point is Steed, after one of these hallucinations, does pull Olu and Jim, two of our crewmates, aside and says, hey, you know, I'm kind of struggling with this whole being a murderer thing, and just was like looking for some help on how to cope. And so to me, that just definitely vibes as a question that you're either going to ask kind of earlier on, or you're not going to ask it at all until it gets to the point of sheer desperation. And he's definitely not at that sheer desperation point yet. He gets there, I would say, by the end of the episode, but not yet. Hello, my darling. Oh. Hi. Okay, so we've got a little guest, but we're gonna power through. Please, baby, don't purr into the microphone. Thank you. You're being a nuisance. Okay. So this whole asking for help with regard to that, that does hit me as something that maybe that you're going to be doing either pretty early on, like it's obviously becomes clear to him pretty quickly that he's struggling with this, or it's going to be, you're going to put it off until it gets to the point of desperation. He is not at the point of desperation yet. So I do kind of feel like maybe then that this is another indication that it hasn't been too terribly long. So all this together, I'm thinking maybe a couple of days. So June the 3rd, so maybe they ran aground like on the 5th, the night of the 5th, and then the island adventure, as it were, kicks off then on the morning of the 6th. All right, so on the 5th, we run aground. The 6th is when we begin our island adventure. And then if we're looking at our clues while we're on the island, we do have that Steed is wearing the same outfit throughout the entire time that they're there. He does start to lose certain pieces of it as the day goes on, but he's still wearing the same outfit. And then also we do have, again, that lighting moving from daytime lighting to golden hour lighting as we approach the end of our trip on the island, and are getting pushed off back to sea. So that all seems to imply that this does in fact happen all on the same day. By the way, another important thing that is happening kind of in the background while they're on the island is Jim has a secret in that Jim does not have a beard, does not have the big nose that they're wearing. So they're wearing a fake beard. Okay. And then, by the way, we do actually have another kind of subplot going on in this episode as all this other island stuff is happening, where Jim has a secret. Jim is wearing a disguise, a fake nose, a fake beard. I believe they're wearing a binder to bind their chests flat. And also, Jim is not mute. And so Lucius happens upon this secret when Jim has gone for a swim off in a cove by themselves. And so we do have this whole altercation regarding that, which ends with Jim kind of taking Lucius prisoner at the end of the episode. And as I mentioned, the episode does end with Blackbeard's ship taking off to follow Steed's ship. And then a couple other points of note in this episode. We do get a comment from Steed to Izzy, one of the pirates that took their hostages. Steed has his knife up to Izzy's cheek like this and tells Izzy, "I've already ruined one man's head this week." Of course, the other man's head that he is referring to would be Nigel, who, again, died by running his sword through his eye and out the back of his skull. So that would be the other man's head that he ruined. And since he says this week, that does confirm for us that 6th date, the 3rd, the 6th, same week. So that does fit pretty well. Another point that we do get is Jim is writing in their diary, and that we hear that this is day 28, dia 28, of them being on the run. We do not yet know what they're on the run from, but they are on the run. So if this is happening the 6th, then we're imagining 28 days prior to that would be like the, what, 6, something like the 8th or 9th, I believe, of May is when they went on the run. And kind of cheating and looking ahead a little bit, we do know that they went on the run from the Republic of Pirates. And we also know that Steed at this point has never been there before, which does mean that Jim would have had to go on the run and get somewhere else before they joined Steed's crew. So that does kind of line up. So the 9th would be the day that Jim and Olu went on the run. And I did put Jim and Olu because Olu does leave with Jim, though Olu technically is not on the run. He just left with Jim. All right, moving on to episode 3, The Gentleman Pirate. This is the Republic of Pirates episode. The episode opens with them like, hey, what are we going to do with our remaining hostage? they decide to take him to the Republic of Pirates to find a fence so he can ultimately be ransomed back to the English. They run into a little bit of trouble where, hello, are you gonna come join me? Anyways, so while they're at the Republic of Pirates, they do run into a little bit of trouble. As I mentioned before, that's where Jim is on the run from, and Steve doesn't really know much about being a pirate, so does not handle himself as well as one might hope. End result is they end up getting tricked into boarding a Spanish naval vessel, thinking they're going to sell their hostage, but in fact they are being turned in for being pirates. Steed gets gut stabbed and hanged, is very close to dying when Blackbeard jumps in and saves the day. He really wants to talk to our boy Steed. Are you going to make up your mind? Your mind cannot be made up to lay down on my notebook. Thank you. Okay, so our clues with this episode, we actually have a whole lot right off the bat to kind of give us an indication of when this episode starts relative to when the previous episode ended. So first of all, we have Steed is dictating another journal entry. Normally he dictates those to Lucius, but as I mentioned, Lucius got captured by Jim at the end of the last episode, and he is still missing. So Steed is dictating this entry to Frenchie. And all signs point to this have only been like maybe a day or two after this incident here. We do see that Frenchie he's not a strong writer, so he draws pictures, interpretive pictures to show what it is that Steed is saying. So we can see his pictures. We get a look in the journal. We see his pictures, but we see opposite to him Lucius's handwriting. So obviously this is the first time Frenchie has taken the dictation from Steed, which is further enforced by the fact that Steed is surprised to find out that Frenchie is drawing pictures rather than writing. Also enforced by the fact that what Steed is dictating to him is clearly the story about their time on the island, which is confirmed by him sharing his idea that he wants to be called the Gentleman Pirate from now on, which is an idea that we saw him have at the end of this previous episode. So all that confirms this is definitely Frenchie's first time writing, and it just doesn't seem likely that Steve would have waited weeks or months or whatever to get these entries down if he is going to have a backup come write in his journal for him. And then additionally, we also just see that there's a little bit of concern about where Lucius is, but they don't seem super worried. Steve does say, I hope he isn't dead, but it's a pretty chill vibe when he says it. So if we're thinking that maybe this is not the very next morning, but the morning of the day after, that would, we're thinking, okay, Lucius, maybe they saw Lucius get aboard the ship because he was already aboard the ship when Jim grabbed him. So they saw Lucius get aboard the ship, so they know he's on board, so he's got to be around here somewhere. We're a little concerned because we haven't seen him, we didn't see him all day yesterday, but it's a big ship. There's a lot of secret passages and stuff, so we're not super worried yet. We're still kind of he's probably squirreled away somewhere. That kind of vibe seems to line up with what's going on here. Also, further enforced by the fact that Frenchie brings up during this conversation, by the way, what are we going to do with the hostage? And they have not at this point decided what to do with the remaining hostage, which again is not something that you think that they would just leave for weeks and weeks or months. Also, when we do see Lucius, we find out where Jim was keeping him, which is inside a trunk, and he pops out and he is very sweaty, very sweaty. So obviously he's been in there for a little while. But at the same time, beyond being like very sweaty, and he seems a little bit out of breath at first, but he seems, other than that, mostly more or less okay. Like he's not wobbling or fainting. He's not having a hard time like walking around. He's not like dying of hunger that we can tell. So again, maybe he was in that trunk for like a solid 36 hours. That is a long time to be in a trunk, and you would be very sweaty if it was a hot trunk. But any longer than that, it starts to feel really like very questionable. Like, how is he surviving in a trunk that long? It is worth noting there is one clue that kind of counter indicates this, just the shape that our hostage, Hornberry is his name, the shape that Hornberry is in is really bad compared to where he was at in episode 6. Like he is, I guess it was just a really hot sunny day the day before, because he is real sunburned now and getting real crispy. His wig is really starting to get disheveled. But like that's one clue that we have, whereas all the other ones do seem to pretty strongly indicate this is only like a couple days later. So that's what we're going to go with, that this morning conversation that we have is happening, like I said, maybe like on the 8th. Okay. I'm not actually going to put that up there. That's not that important of an event. We just need to establish that that's where we're at this morning. So going from there, this morning conversation that C does have first with Frenchie and then up on deck with the rest of the crew, determining what they're going to do with the hostage. Steed is wearing one of his casual morning outfits, which is where he has put on his linen shirt and he's put on his breeches for the day. But he's just wearing one of his robes over the top. No waistcoat, jacket, no cravat, none of that. This is his casual morning wear. So he's in that. And he's wearing that for both of those conversations. And then he is also wearing that when he finds Lucius in Jim and Olu's room. So that implies that this is all happening on the same morning. And then he specifically says to Lucius, I need your help getting me dressed for the big day. So that means, hey, I need you to help me go get changed. That's what we're going to do now. So when we see him in a different outfit, that means like he just got changed. It's still the same day. So that means that this adventure Republic of Pirates is still on the same day as that morning when he was having Frenchie doodle in his notebook. So that's all happening on the same day. And then he is in that same pure white outfit throughout the entire rest of the day at the Republic of Pirates, all the way through to being on the Spanish ship. So this is all happening. Everything in this episode is happening over the course of one single day. And the lighting does seem to support that. We do have, again, it's kind of maybe a morning-ish looking lighting. Not in the first conversation, they're inside, but when they're out on deck, moving into full day lighting and ultimately getting to that golden hour lighting when they're about to get on the Spanish vessel. So again, all of that, everything here, all happened in one day. Hi, yeah, you cannot sit there. That is your mama's seat. You cannot sit there. Okay, then moving on to episode 4, Discomfort in a Married State. And some of you may have been thinking like, I remember that quote from earlier. You were referencing the episode title. No, indeed not, my dears. Both myself and the episode title and the time that Seed says the same quote in the episode are all referencing an actual historical document referring to the real Seed Bonnet and why he left to become a pirate, that he was uncomfortable in a married state. So yeah, he left his wife and kids, became a pirate, ended up being a guest aboard Blackbeard's ship for months, and was seen on at least one occasion wandering around the ship in just his nightgown. So, make of that what you will. David Jenkins certainly did. So, anyways, episode 4. This episode, the first half of the episode, we have Steed having flashbacks via fever dreams of before he left to become a pirate, while Ed runs around the ship, gets to know the crew, crew members, all that. Then Steed wakes up. He and Ed are just insta-besties, so in sync. Then we have the incident where the Spanish, who are pissed off about the last episode, are, trying to catch up with them. Originally, Ed has a plan to escape. Plan falls through. Ed and Steed together come up with another plan to be a lighthouse to escape. That plan works. Then the episode ends on 2 very disparate notes. First, we have Ed and Steed agreeing that they are going to have a sort of arrangement where Steed is going to teach Ed about how to enjoy the finer things in life, how to be a gentleman, while Ed teaches Steed how to be a good pirate. And then following that, we have a note where Ed is speaking with Izzy, who is his first mate, and being like, Izzy does not like Steed, by the way, hates Steed so much. Ed is talking to Izzy and says, hey, don't even worry about it. I am just pretending. I'm going to kill him, use his body to fake my death, and then I am going to go steal his identity. Some debate as to how real this plan is and how much it was just nonsense to throw Izzy off the trail. I have my opinions about how well the plan does not hang together, if you think about it, but everyone is welcome to their opinion. The point is, that's what Ed does tell Izzy. So moving on to our clues, I do actually want to quickly dip into those flashbacks that Steed was having. It's not necessarily super relevant to the overall timeline, but there is some, I don't know if confusion is the right word, but we do see it in the flashbacks. Steed gives Mary an anniversary present, which is a model of the ship that he's on now, and explains to her, hey, I'm getting the ship made for us and the kids to go live on it, and Mary is not into that at all. And then the way that it is kind of shot and presented to us, it kind of does feel like he then runs away to the ship that very same night. I do just want to kind of unpack some stuff there, some of the clues, because I do not think that is the case. I think that's more of a situation, like I was saying earlier, about this being really heavily leaning on emotional truths. I think that probably was an emotional truth for Steed, that when Mary was like, no, we're not doing this, he really started to check out then, and fully was checked out by the time that Mary is trying to have this conversation with him about, hey, that later that night. But I think the literal truth, if we look at it, first of all, just the clue of he wanted them to come on the ship with him. That's something that they would have to pack for, and they would have to get their belongings moved to the ship. There's no reason for Steed to have already done that with his belongings if he's expecting his wife and kids to need to do that with their belongings. So he would have needed time, and now he's got to do it in secret too, because he's not telling anyone that he's planning on running away. So that does imply, again, that there needs to be some time for him to get that done. We also have him making the direct comment to Mary about the ship that I'll get it stopped, which implies that he has started the process of having the ship built, but has not yet actually had it built. It's maybe in the process, but it's not done yet. And then the final clue that we have is the outfit that Steed is wearing during this anniversary. Celebration's probably a strong word for it. Gift giving exchange. he is wearing a particular waistcoat that's actually one of his shorter ones that he wears. But then the outfit that we see him wearing when he does actually run away in the night to go to his ship is actually a different waistcoat, one of the longer ones that he has. So he is wearing fully different clothing. So all that together definitely implies to me that there is a gap there between that anniversary date and the date when he actually does set sail. No indication whatsoever as to what that gap was. So we'll just use that November 21st date as their anniversary in the show too, because why not? All right, so that's just like a little bee that's in my bonnet. So I wanted to touch on that before we get to the clues that are actually relevant to the real timeline of the present day stuff. So we, as I said, with the previous episode ends with Blackbeard saving them from the Spanish. And it was like sort of golden hour when they get aboard the ship. So that's like evening, nighttime that's happening. And then this episode starts, it appears to be morning, and that is confirmed for us later because Ed is having a conversation with Izzy about the clouds at the very beginning. And then later on in the episode, he does refer to that conversation as, the color of the sky this morning, and then the shape of the clouds confirms it. So this is now, we're starting in morning, and it is very, very likely to be the morning after this incident with the Spanish, because Ed is just now introducing himself to the crew, just now getting a feel for what Steed's ship is like. The crew is still repairing the ship after their scuffle is the only word that's coming to mind. I guess fight maybe after their fight with the Spanish. So this is obviously happening pretty immediately afterwards. And then as far as the events of the day, they do all seem to take place on the same day. First of all, as I mentioned, Ed says the color of the sky this morning when he is discussing his original plan to get away from the Spanish. So that does tell us, okay, this is all on the same day. Also confirmed by, at one point he asks Lucius to count down backwards from 1 hour and 47 minutes. So obviously from that point to when the countdown ends, which is right as Ed is about to reveal his plan, would be 1 hour and 47 minutes, like approximately. I don't know how accurate Lucius's counting down was, but so all that is kind of confirming for us that most of these events in this episode are all taking place in the same day. Also of note, Jim makes a comment that they, by the way, they are revealed to be, not mute, no beard, fake nose, at the end of the previous episode. And they make a comment because the crew is spooked. At this point, they think Jim is a woman. Ultimately, we come down that Jim's gender is just Jim. But they are concerned about Jim being a woman, and that's bad luck. And Jim says, I've been aboard the ship for weeks. So, we were at June 8th, back to May 13th. So yeah, that feels like weeks. So that checks out. So we seem to be in good standing here. Just one other minor point is, as Ed is revealing his plan to escape from the Spanish, the first part of it is just referring to what the weather was like that day and how he knew that the fog was going to roll in. But the second half of the plan is, hey, but they'll still be they're headed straight for us, even though the fog rolls in and they can't see us. They already knew where we were. They'll still run right into us. And Ed's like, no, don't worry about it. Because we're just going to pull up our anchor and just let the currents drift us away, because it's a full moon tonight. Specifically, he says, for it is September the 2nd. Night of the full moon, September the 2nd. What the fuck? What? We are on June 8th, 9th. September the 2nd. Great. Love it. Yeah. September 2nd was the full moon. And he does get corrected by Izzy. Oh, it's not September the 2nd. No, it's September 1st. And Lucius backs him up. Yeah, it's September 1st. So somehow it is September all of a sudden. So like, what happened here? How long was Lucius in that trunk? Is he immortal? Is he a Time Lord? Is the Revenge a TARDIS? Is it Lucius's TARDIS? Like, what the heck is going on here? Where did these months go? Also, all our full moon dates are apparently wrong, so just cross all of those out. I am not going to recalculate. Obviously, July and August apparently don't even exist in this universe, so I'm not going to recalculate the past ones. But we will go ahead and throw up the future full moon dates that are yet to come. So we know that one's on September the 2nd. Previously, we had one on the 20th and then the 20th. So we would say the 2nd and then probably October 2nd. Okay, so we got October 2nd, and if we had one on October 2nd, then roughly maybe October 30th is when we would expect the next one. And there we are, back on track apparently, in September. Cool, love it. And then one more note. Ed does mention that the reason that he got confused and thought it was the 2nd rather than the 1st is because he forgot that it was a leap year. Now, is it probably a more reasonable explanation that that was just literally the first lie that Ed could come up with, and he just threw it out there? More reasonable than thinking that, oh yeah, this guy has been literally counting the days every single day since February and literally has never had cause to check it against someone else or be corrected in that, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. So like in that, like 7-8 month time period? Like, yeah, but at this point, fuck it. I trust him. I believe him. I think he did it. So in this alternate universe where there is no July or August, 1717 was a leap year. Let's go. Let's have fun with it. Great. So moving on here. On the 1st is when they do their little lighthouse fuckery, successfully get away from the Spanish. And obviously that happens at night. That's, how they were able to pull it off in the first place. And then we phase to morning, a rare example of morning golden hour. And we know that this is definitely the very next morning. First of all, because Ed and Steve swapped clothes yesterday and they are still swapped. And also more crucially, Ed does mention to Steve that yesterday was the most fun that he has had in ages. So obviously the fuckery was on the 1st. Then on the 2nd is when they come to their arrangements. And also when Ed has that conversation with Izzy. Great. Moving on to episode 5, Best Revenge is Dressing Well. This episode starts with Ed and Steve doing their trade-off for training, pirate training for gentleman training. while that's going on, they find an invite to a party. They decide to crash the party. Does not go well at first, but ultimately the night turns around and ends on a very, very romantic note. The two of them in the moonlight, Steed gently folding up Ed's very precious scrap of silk and telling him that he wears fine things well. Very beautiful. We love it. Also, there is a subplot on this one where while they're off at the party, Izzy and Lucius have a power struggle, and Lucius wins. Love that. Great for him. And another subplot with Frenchie and Olu scamming the living daylights out of all the rich people at the party. Also great. Love that for them. As far as our clues, we start, like I said, with some training trade-offs. So Steed and his crew are on a raid with Ed's crew. And throughout all these various little clips of this raid, Steed is wearing the same outfit. So we can be pretty confident that this is all the same raid. And Steed mentions during this, in a voiceover, he mentions that it's been an extraordinary few days training with Blackbeard's crew. So this is obviously a few days after, so they came to arrangement on the 2nd, so a few days later. So roughly, we can say maybe the 5th. So the 5th is when they have their training raid. And they also find the invite that was found during the raid. And we know that it was found, again, during that same raid because Steed is still wearing the same outfit. And the invite itself says that the party is tonight. So that party must also be happening on this same day. And then our you wear fine thing well scene, beautiful scene in the moonlight. Steed and Ed are still wearing their party clothes, so we have to assume that this is happening the same day as well. It'd be very weird for them to get dressed back up. And Steed does also comment to Ed that, hey, I'm sorry tonight was a bust, because Ed ultimately did not have, well, I think actually in the end he probably was having for a good time, but overall did not enjoy himself at the party. So that also was happening the same day. One potential little hiccup that we do have is that, as I said, it's a beautiful moonlit scene. Full moon. 5th, we already said the full moon was on the 2nd. However, I think, again, this is one of those emotional truth moments because the moon is definitely bigger than the full moon ought to be anyways. So we can imagine that perhaps it's also a little bit fuller. The moon is just hitting their eye like a big pizza pie. So we're going to let it slide. I think it's fine. Then one other point, the episode actually does officially end with Chauncey, so that's Nigel's twin brother, speaking with King George about, hey, this dude killed my brother, I want revenge. And King George is like, yeah, sure, have at it. Now, the Gentleman Pirate, Blackbeard, all those, they were all Pirates of the Caribbean. So that's kind of generally the area that they were sailing in. And then King George, the King of England, obviously was in England on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And I'm not a big history person, but I try to do a little bit of research. And from what I can tell, the average trip time to cross the Atlantic, plus factoring in a little bit of a buffer, because we have to assume the message took a little time to get to Chauncey. And then I don't know if Chauncey was already in the Caribbean and he had to go to England, or if he was in England and the message had to come to him. But it took a little time to get to Chauncey, and then once he had the message, it probably took him at least a little time to arrange a meeting with King George. So we're going to say maybe total it took roughly 2 months from the time that Nigel died to the time when Chauncey could have been standing in front of King George and asking permission to get revenge, basically. So June 3rd, that would put us at August 3rd for when this conversation happened, which at least that September does get us a little bit back on track. Okay, so moving on to episode 6, The Art of Fuckery. This is the episode where Ed shows Steed how to do a fuckery, or gives him an example of one rather. And so Steed and his crew decide that they want to put on a fuckery. Their version of fuckery is a little bit more like a haunted house, but you know, they had fun, so that's what's important. Meanwhile, we also have Izzy really pushing Ed about, hey, you said you were going to kill this guy, so you got to do it. That comes to a head during the fuckery, where Ed is trying to kill Steed, and then also the specific things that they try to do for the fuckery ends up clashing together, and Ed has a bit of a PTSD like trigger moment. He hides out. Steed comes and comforts him. They have a very lovely, intimate conversation. They sort things out between them. Izzy's still pissed, though. Izzy is always pissed off, all of the time. So he's still pissed, and so he's like, fine, I'll do it. Challenges Steed to a duel. Loses. Steed outwits him. And per the terms of the duel, Izzy has to leave the ship. And that's where we leave off. As far as our clues, first of all, we have the first of many. They end up having some very eventful days, but here's the first of a very eventful day where we have, we see them first in like this lovely sort of golden hour. The whole crew is up on deck, and you know, they're all laughing together. They're like snacking on some stuff. They're all having a real great time. Again, except for Izzy. Izzy's always pissed off all the time. Everyone else, though, is very much enjoying themselves. And then we see Ed and Steed having a sword fighting lesson, which includes Steed not doing too well. So Ed's like, ooh, let me teach you this advanced trick of the trade. Stab me. I'm going to show you, run me through. And then after Steed is convinced at gunpoint to stab him, he's like, by the way, this is a trick of how to survive being stabbed. Look at all my scars that I have, because I keep taking the sword in the right spot and I'm doing fine. So that happens. And then scary story time. We're all sharing scary stories. Happens. Those all are happening on the same day. Like when you're watching it, you kind of probably assume that there's like a couple of different days there. No, Steed is wearing the same outfit through this entire thing. He's wearing his lilac breeches, his lilac waistcoat. The waistcoat kind of comes on and off a little bit, but definitely same lilac breeches. Buckle shoes too, which are definitely of note because normally he wears his shoes with his white ribbons, but he's wearing his buckle shoes throughout all of these scenes. So they had a very busy day, and I can only assume that the pipe that Ed is smoking during Scary Story Hour is a pipe full of opium because the man just got stabbed like 20 minutes ago. So yeah, all that happens not even one day, one evening. And as far as what evening that happens on, we do get a voiceover from Izzy mentioning that it's almost a fortnight that they've been aboard the Revenge. A fortnight, if you don't know, is 2 weeks, 14 nights, fortnight. So almost fortnight, we're looking like 12, 13 days-ish. They came aboard the Revenge on the 1st. So like roughly maybe the 13th is when this is happening. Okay. So Scary Stories are being told on the 13th, and that is what triggers Ed to decide to do a fuckery. Now, so Scary Stories is nighttime, and then the fuckery happens in the morning. We know like Buttons actually comes to wake Steed up. So that's definitely happening in the morning. So the immediate assumption is that it's happening the following morning. But like for me, again, Ed just got stabbed, like run through. You can lay down? Yeah? Yeah? You can't lay down on my notebook, babe. Thank you. Yeah. So the immediate assumption here is that this is happening the following morning, but for me, like, Ed just got run through, just got stabbed, and I just, like, I don't feel like he could do that quick of a turnaround after getting stabbed. It's already pretty late in the evening, since the sword fighting. It was already dark when they were sword fighting. And then we had to have the crew, I don't know where the crew was. They were having a jam session or something below decks. So they had to come back up on decks. We had to treat Ed's wound, bring the crew back up on decks, and start telling these serious stories. So it's going to be pretty late at night by the time that Ed decides he's going to do a fuckery for them. So that seems too quick a turnaround for me. It just seems more realistic to think that Ed decided that night, okay, we're going to do it, and then spent the next day, like, working with his crew to get it all pulled together and ready to go. Ed does mention, like, oh, a good fuckery takes ages to plan, but we can maybe assume that this is a fuckery, like a similar one that they've done before, so it's a bit quicker to pull together. And then, so he has a day to plan it out, and then he actually does the fuckery the following morning. So the 13th and the 14th is when he's planning it, and then the actual fuckery happens on the 15th. At the end of his fuckery, he's left hanging in his harness, and then the next time we see him, he's confronting Izzy. You left me hanging there for 20 minutes. So we can assume that this conversation is happening like 20, maybe 30 minutes later. I don't know how long it took him to track down Izzy after he finally got out of that harness. This is not a conversation that you wait a couple of days to have. Like, this is obviously a pretty quick turnaround. And then they have their conversation where basically Izzy is confronting Ed about, hey, you said you'd kill this guy. And Ed ends the conversation by like, yeah, fine. I said I'll do it. And he walks away. And then we next see now Izzy walking up to Ed and being like, hey, by the way, I will happily kill him for you. I'm sure you would, Izzy. So again, that does imply that is like quick turnaround, like that's a direct response. Ed walked out in the middle of the conversation, so Izzy came to follow up on that. So this is probably all happening on that same day of the 15th. And that's just important to establish that conversation is happening on the 15th, because then Steed runs up and he mentions we're going to come across a Dutch merchant vessel tomorrow night. So if that conversation is happening on the 15th, then we can reasonably assume that Steed and his cruise fuckery happens on the 16th. Okay, so Steed's fuckery happens on the 16th. We see Ed's panic attack or PTSD trigger moment happening at the end of Steed's fuckery, so we can, reasonably conclude that then that's happening that same time. So his panic attack, their bathtub conversation, happens also on the 16th. And then Steed is still wearing the same outfit, and he comes up. They come up on deck and are like talking to everyone, like, congratulations on the good fuckery. It was really great. So that's all going to be happening again on the same day. And then as they're talking about the fuckery with everyone, that's mid-conversation is when Izzy comes in to challenge Steed to the duel. So again, the fuckery and then all that other stuff all happens right here on the 16th. Okay, so Steed and Izzy have their duel. Steed does win the duel by taking a sword and getting himself pinned to the mast and surviving. And so that's how Steed wins. And then Izzy is banished because of that. We see Izzy leave, and it is now like very gray morning light, so early morning here. And we know that it's early the very next morning, beyond the fact that there's no reason to put it off for days at a time. Also, we see Steed, after Izzy leaves, we see Steed still pinned up to the mast. So it's bad enough that they apparently left him there more or less overnight. One hopes they didn't leave him up there for multiple days. 17th, Izzy leaves. There is also a scene where Izzy meets up with Spanish Jackie and is like, ooh, I got a proposition for you. And but I'm not going to try to place that on the timeline. We just really don't have any clear indication of when it happens, other than obviously sometime after the 17th. It's not worth it to try to figure it out, to be honest. Episode 7, this is happening. This is the episode where one of our crew members, Swede, gets scurvy. We are out of oranges, so we got to go to St. Augustine, Florida to get more oranges. Yeah. In St. Augustine, we get more of Jim's backstory. We learn that they are an orphan who was raised by a nun to be a knife assassin to get revenge for the murder of their family. So that's really interesting. Cool stuff. Not cool for Jim, but is an interesting character. And then also in this episode, Steed buys a treasure map that is an obviously fake treasure map, but he and Ed and Lucius, who is somehow both the third wheel and the one person carrying this relationship, all go on a treasure hunt together. And they do find some real treasure. It was not the day spent together or the friends we made along the way. We spend every day together. The real treasure was this cool petrified orange that Steed found. So yeah, fun day. And then at the end, Jim decides to go off and further their mission for revenge. We wish them the best of luck. And Ed and Steed have a nightcap and decide to be co-captains of their revenge. So, now, I actually want to start by just establishing that this episode all happens over the course of one day, and then we can worry about trying to place what day it happens on. Just because it is kind of interesting, because if we start by looking at Steed's outfits, that actually seems to imply that it's happening over the course of 2 separate days. Because we start with Steed talking with Ed, and he is wearing, again, his relaxing morning outfit with the linen shirt and the robe and the breeches. It's the same goddamn lilac breeches that he was wearing on their super busy day. So that's the outfit that he's wearing. And then, they have their discussion. They decide to go to St. Augustine. They get to St. Augustine. And then we see Steed wearing a totally different outfit. So he is wearing now an outfit that's like sort of a chocolate brown satiny as opposed to those lilac breeches. Also, his shirt is different. The shirt that he was wearing at the beginning of the episode is a linen shirt that has, like sleeve is probably length, roughly like mine is here. But instead of the rough edges, it's got these like pretty lacy scalloped edges. But the shirt that he's wearing with the brown outfit has, again, a sort of a sleeve like this, but this part of the sleeve here is very a light fabric. It's maybe a tulle. I don't know. I couldn't get a great look at it. I'm not an expert on fabrics anyways. But a very light fabric, and it's sort of like an off yellowish color, or rather off white towards yellow color, as opposed to the white linen shirt that he was wearing in the morning. So all that seems to imply that, okay, he wore the lilac outfit, and then for that day, and then the next day, the day they arrived in St. Augustine, he was wearing the brown outfit, which apparently this is going to be the one time that it actually takes them, a day to get somewhere and aren't able to sail everywhere they want to go in 20 minutes or less. But when we dig a little deeper, the next thing that we notice is actually Lucius's clothes. So Lucius usually wears a shirt with horizontal stripes, and he wears his red jacket. In this episode, however, he is wearing a shirt with vertical stripes that has like sort of a woven looking pattern to these stripes. Now, he's got 2 shirts apparently. And so normally I wouldn't think it's weird that a guy with like 2 short shirts is wearing the same shirt a couple days in a row. But Lucius wears this other shirt so rarely that it does kind of become weird. Like, it seems like he generally does not wear this shirt unless maybe like his normal shirt was dirty, he was getting it washed or something. I don't know. But because he wears this shirt so little, it does seem weird that he might wear it 2 days in a row. That does kind of indicate that maybe this is just all in one day. We also have like the story that the lighting is telling us. We definitely have a very early, that morning golden hour lighting when Steed is first having his conversation with Ed and bringing him tea. And then that transitions to like a morning lighting. Like we can definitely see that light is kind of angled. We got some long shadows going on once we arrive at St. Augustine. And that, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same morning, but it just kind of builds. And then we do build to like a full day lighting, and then we build to nighttime lighting throughout the course of the episode. So the lighting story of this episode is seeming to indicate that, yes, this is all happening over the course of one day. We start in morning golden hour and we end after dark. But the real clincher here that, yes, this conversation where they decide to go to St. Augustine is happening on the same day that they actually are there is Jim does not want to go to St. Augustine. So while they're having that morning conversation where Steed is still wearing his casual morning outfit, Jim like freaks out like, no, we can't go there. Do you know what the humidity will do to your hair? But then we arrive and Olu kind of not confronts, that's probably a little strong of a word for it, but like says, hey Jim, like what's up? Why don't you want to go to St. Augustine? Which in itself does not necessarily, he could just be bringing it up now because they just arrived. But he also comments that, you know, you seem pretty freaked out about it just now. The just now referring to, of course, that earlier conversation when they decided to go. And if he's using just now to refer to that conversation, it could not have been more than a couple hours ago at most, and probably less than that. Like, definitely, we're looking at this all happening on the same day. Then trying to determine now what same day that this is happening on relative to when we last left them, we were on September the 17th. We don't get a whole lot of clues. We do have the fact that they are going orange picking, so orange season suggests that it has to be at least October. It cannot be later than June, but we wouldn't expect it to be that late anyways. Has to be at least sometime in October at the earliest. Further along, we have Pete makes a comment about how Jim just started talking. So Jim started talking again back with the Spanish on that ship. We still have it here on the 8th, but if we move it to our September the 2nd anchor point, then this would actually be happening on August 31st. And so September the 1st would be the first full day when Jim is actively talking with everyone, which if we think maybe sometime early October, that means Jim's been talking roughly a month, which is kind of a long time to say, oh, they just started talking. But I mean, July, August, all of June, half of May, like 3.5 months that they weren't talking to a month that they have been, maybe starts to kind of work. And then we also have to factor in the fact that Pete is like deliberately trying to make Jim look bad when he makes that comment. So it works. If we think early October, that comment could make sense that he would say that. And then our last kind of clue to really try to narrow it down to a specific date, the episode actually ends with a conversation between Izzy, Spanish Jackie, and Chauncey. They all got in for Steed, so they're all gonna work together to take him down. And remember, last we saw Chauncey, he was in England, and that was back on August 3rd. If we give that same rough 2-month buffer time to get from England back to the Caribbean to Spanish Jackie's Tavern for this meeting, that would put the meeting on October 3rd, which, you know, falls neatly in our early October timeline. So we're just going to use that date, October 3rd being when everything, absolutely everything in this episode happens. Okay, now, episode 8. We go way back. This is the episode where we have Ed's old shipmate Calico Jack show up. He is a real jackass and is definitely very deliberately bullying Steed We, as the audience, it's very obvious to us, it's very obvious to Steed, but the rest of the crew, and in particular Ed, do not seem to be picking up on that, which actually ends up leading to a fight between Ed and Steed, which in turn leads to that night when Jack really gets out of hand and accidentally kills Carl. Carl is a seagull, but he is also Buttons' his close friend. So that means he's a friend for all of us. And so Jack gets kicked off the ship, and Ed actually ends up going with him. But then, pretty shortly after, it is revealed that Jack is, this is all a setup. Jack is actually working with Izzy, and by extension Chauncey, and I guess Spanish Jackie. Like, I'm not really sure what her role in all this is, other than she let them meet at her bar. But he is in cahoots with them. This whole thing was a setup to get Steed and his crew to Blind Man's Cove, where they could be ambushed by the English, and then also to get Ed off the ship in a way before the English showed up. Didn't totally make the mark on that one. He is off the ship, but they are in a dinghy still in Blind Man's Cove when the English show up. Ed is pissed off, heads back to the Revenge, and gets there just in time to get arrested with everyone else. And that's where we end the episode. As far as our clues, we actually start with a pretty strong one where Buttons is having a conversation with Carl, his seagull friend. He is out basking in moonglow and makes a comment about how the full moon's not until tomorrow night. And we do see the moon, and it is a waxing gibbous moon up in the sky there. So we know that this is the night before the full moon. We missed the second moon on the 2nd of October, so we must be at the one on the 30th. And so it's the night before, so it's the night of the 29th. And Jack does row up in his dinghy right after Buttons makes the comment about the full moon. So Jack then arrives the night of the 29th. Then as far as when Jack is on the ship, there are like a lot of like little clues that I could try to point out. But honestly, the main point here is that then the next time it's nighttime, we see Buttons complaining. He's trying to bask in moon glow, and we do see the full moon up in the sky. So that means that next nighttime we see is in fact the very next night, the night of the full moon, which means everything that happened in between with Jack must have all happened on that same day. Okay, so our day with Jack, Carl's death, and Ed leaving all happens on the 30th. And then as far as when the English arrive, we can be pretty confident that happens on the very next day. A number of little clues for that. First of all, the fact when Ed and Jack leave, they get in the dinghy and just row to the nearby beach because it's the middle of the night. But obviously then they're going to leave the next morning. I mean, Jack is trying to get out of there quickly before the English show up. So there's no reason for them to be hanging about on this beach for days. Then also we see that Steed has been up all night, perched up in his windowsill like a gremlin watching these guys because he is not handling this breakup well. Honestly though, Ed is only handling it slightly better. So he was up all night, so that does again imply that this is happening the very next morning. And then also we get a reference from Olu to his hangover from all the rum that they drank the previous day with Jack. So all that does indicate that the ambush by the English is happening again that very next day. Episode 9, Act of Grace. This episode picks up right where the last episode ended. The English are, interrogating them and, searching for evidence, all that. Steed is ultimately sentenced to death by firing squad. To get out of that, he and Ed both take an act of grace. That was a real historical act where pirates were allowed to denounce, their life of piracy, agree to fight on the English side, win their war against the Spanish. And in turn, they would be pardoned for all of their crimes. Again, not strong on history. My understanding of how the actual act worked was they were kind of allowed to go on their way and just be privateers. But in this show, they are taken to the Royal Privateering Academy for Wayward Seamen. Presumably it's like a boot camp of some kind. Initially, Steed is eager to stay, but Ed is kind of like blasé about it. But then they kiss. And after the kiss, Ed is super gung-ho about running away with Steed. So they plan to escape. Unfortunately, Steed is actually, before he can make his escape to go meet up with Ed, he is kidnapped by Chauncey, who is not happy about Steed having escaped his death by firing squad and is, planning to do it himself, but trips and he shoots himself in the same eye that his brother stabbed himself in. As you can imagine, super traumatic for Steed. He starts freaking out. Next time we see him, he is walking in the door of his house. His wife is having tea with her widow friends. That's embarrassing. So that's where we leave Steed at the end of this episode. Meanwhile, Ed was waiting for Steed to show up, did not realize that Steed had got kidnapped, and so when dawn rolls around, they agreed they were going to leave at dawn. When dawn rolls around, Ed leaves and he goes back to revenge, very upset. And then that's where we leave him. So as far as the timeline goes, again, like I said, we initially just pick up right where the last one left off. So that whole, it's not really a trial, the sentencing, obviously is happening on the same day, and we can assume the Act of Grace is also happening on that same day. So they take the Act of Grace on the 31st, and then they're planning on going to the academy. It's kind of hard to tell how long passes between when they take the Act of Grace and when they arrive at the academy. We don't get a lot of clues. The only clues that we really have is Steed's outfit. Now, Steed does not change his outfit, which in this case is not as strong a clue as it normally is, because I assume that they were taken into custody and escorted to the academy. So he probably did not have the opportunity to change clothing. However, we can notice that his clothing is not particularly disheveled at all. Like, he does not have his jacket on and his cravat is a little bit loose, but he did not have his jacket on and his cravat was a little bit loose, to the same degree of looseness when he took the Act of Grace. He is like in the same condition. He's still got his waistcoat on and all the way buttoned up to the top. So it does not seem that much time has passed. And just based on that and based on some other stuff that we're going to get to in a minute, I kind of think that it happened on the same day. I guess Blind Man's Cove and the academy just happened to be close to each other. Sure, why not? Sounds great. So they arrive at the academy on that same day, the 31st, and then all the stuff that we see from them at the academy is almost certainly on the same day, because again, it's just very much like flowing one to another. Steed is told that he has been declared dead. In fact, he's been dead for months. Like, he's only been gone for like 6 months, so Mary wasted no time on that. But yeah, sure, he's been dead for months. And then immediately we see him like reacting to that and kind of obsessing over it. And then he's kind of also weirded out by the fact that Ed is like so chill about this whole thing. So he walks out, goes to the beach, and is having a think. Then Ed comes and finds him and is like, hey, there you are. Like, definitely a pretty clear flow. Also, in that middle conversation, Ed has his beard shaved off, and that was for regulation. So obviously that's happening like the first day they arrived. They're not waiting days to get that done. So all that stuff at the academy, we can assume, is all happening on the same day. And that means the kiss is also happening on the same day. One thing, though, is during that conversation on the beach, Ed does make a comment about how this is the past few weeks is most fun that he's had, ages maybe ever. Buddy, we're at 2 months. 8 weeks is not a few weeks. like 3 to 4 weeks is a few weeks. So I guess we were on the 30th full moon. I guess that was actually the second full moon. And I guess orange season just started early in 1717, and Chauncey made really good time crossing the Atlantic. Yeah, so all this, we're just going to shift everything over. Great, cool. That's where we're at. So the 31st now is actually the 3rd. So now we get them actually leaving. As I said, Ed leaves at dawn, and he says to Steed while they're on the beach, we leave at dawn. So obviously he's leaving at dawn the next day. And Steed, just for like simplicity's sake, he gets kidnapped in the middle of the night, and we'll just assume that it was after midnight. So technically it's the next day, just so I can go ahead and put down that they're both leaving on the 4th, or rather Steed gets kidnapped on the 4th, and then Ed leaves on the 4th. Right, so then we have one last thing to kind of figure out when it happened for these two guys in this episode. When did they get to where they were going to? So here's the thing. Ed, when he arrives back to the ship, he's not looking good in the sense that he's clearly very heartbroken, but he's looking okay in the sense he's not disheveled at all. His hair is still in its like little half up bun. He's got the few wispy strands, but he always has the few wispy strands. Other than that, it's held up pretty perfectly. So I just don't think he could have been steadily rowing for all that long. Like, he's not in the presence of mind where he would have put it back up because he wants to present himself well or anything. So he just could not have been rowing for long enough for it to fall down. And additionally, like, he's not like sweaty. His shirt has not come untucked or anything. Like, he's looking fine. So I don't think he was rowing for very long. And the same thing with Steed. Steed is slightly more disheveled than Ed is, but he was already slightly more disheveled when he got kidnapped. Like, obviously, you don't have a lot of time to make yourself presentable when you get kidnapped. So yeah, he arrives home with his shirt untucked and fully barefoot. Apparently he walked all the way home barefoot. But his shirt was already untucked. He was already barefoot when he was kidnapped and was talking with Chauncey. So again, I don't think he could have been walking that long. Like, he was not sweaty at all even. Like, I guess nobody on this show sweats except for Hornberry and Wellington and Lucius. Obviously, Lucius gets very sweaty. But yeah, it does not seem like it could have been that long. Hey, okay, so this is now take 3 of the end of this video. So apparently my phone ran out of storage space and just stopped recording. Did not seem fit to tell me. I deleted a bunch of stuff off it. I was like, okay, great. Go ahead and start recording now. Redid the whole ending, and then apparently the stuff that I deleted did not count as deleted. Like, the phone was like, no, storage is definitely still full. Restarted my phone. There's more storage space in it now. I double checked. So we're gonna try to do this ending again. Hopefully it works. It's like 1 a.m. I don't want to be doing this, but I want to get this recorded. And y'all are just going to have to deal with the fact that I've already written everything down. I'm not going to refresh this whole thing. Yeah, Kitty she's so upset. It is past our bedtime, you guys. Oh, poor baby. I know it's past bedtime. I know. Can you lay down? Please? Please, Mama is so tired, baby. We just want to end this video. Can you calm down for me so I can end this video? Yeah? Can you do that for your Mama? Can you? Okay. So where I left you, we were determining when exactly Ed and Steed managed to arrive back at their respective places. We already talked about how they are not at all disheveled. Then moving on to, please do not, Kitty. Moving on then to sort of the lighting story that we're being told. It is full dark when Steed gets kidnapped. Then we move on to Ed, where it is full dark, and the sky is starting to lighten to a sort of purpley pink dawn. Then we move to him arriving at the Revenge, where we see the sun is very low in the sky. Then we get these long shadows, so that implies morning, possibly evening, but probably morning, because then we transition over to Steed, where the lighting we're getting is like fully midday lighting, and we see Mary with her widow group. They're having tea, so if it's like tea time, it's like afternoon. So we definitely seem to be getting the indication then that Steed left in the middle of the night and like walked for, I guess, roughly 12 hours. It's a long time to be walking, barefoot too, and in his basically 1717 equivalent of his jammies. So obviously not in a great place there, but yeah, so he walked for about like 12 hours, got home that next, I guess the same day, since we said he left a little after midnight, get home on the 4th, and then Ed got in his little dinghy like early dawn, was rowing for just a couple hours, and got to the ship morning time. Cool. I guess Steed's house, Dead Man's Cove, where the ship Revenge was just apparently hanging out, and the academy, all just real close together. Very convenient. And then the last kind of thing that I do want to note that is happening in episode 9, just mostly because it's funny, is so Chauncey, it appears, had named Izzy the captain of the Revenge, what with both of her co-captains getting arrested and sent to boot camp. So Izzy gets named the captain of the Revenge on here 31st, which really the 3rd, the day of the 3rd, like late morning probably. By that night, so it's nighttime, so it's that night, the crew has already unanimously voted to commit mutiny and are ready to throw him overboard the next morning, and only don't because Ed happens to arrive just then. So yeah, it took Izzy less than 24 hours to go from being named captain to being mutinied on, which is like impressive in its own way. All right, now moving on to episode 10, Wherever You Go, There You Are. This episode has 2 concurrent plot lines. One plot line is one of Steed. He is back at his house. He is miserable. He does not want to be there. Nobody else wants him to be there. It just feels like he has to. It's like his duty or whatever. But ultimately, after his wife Mary tries to kill him, and then they have a bit of a heart-to-heart, he realizes that he is actually really fully in love with Ed and wants to go to be with him, and which works out great for Mary because she also has a boyfriend that she wants to be with, and her husband's really getting in the way. So they, as a family, fake Steed's death, and Steed leaves and ends up actually running across his crew. So meanwhile, with Ed, like I said, he was heartbroken, goes into his sad girl phase where he is in a pill fort, eating marmalade straight out of the jar with his fingers. But then kind of moves on, is ready to start healing, really even kind of ready to shake things up, considering maybe a career change. Doesn't really want to be a pirate anymore. Izzy, of course, as Izzy always is pissed off about this. So he corners Ed, threatens him. Ed, who is obviously very emotionally vulnerable at the moment, does not handle it well at all. Not in the slightest. Ends up attempting to kill Lucius, pushes him overboard, gets rid of all Steed's things, and then maroons most of the rest of Steed's crew. That's how Steed managed to find him. They got marooned. So that's where we leave our guys. Looking at our clues, I'm actually going to start with Steed's storyline, and then we will do Ed's storyline. It just is easier to go like that. So with Steed, like we said, he got back home on the 4th, And then we open in this episode with him waking up and commenting, "I forgot how much I love this bed." So obviously that was, the night before the 5th, right? If he's commenting on how much he loved it, that must have been the first night he's slept in it since he left. And that's also reinforced by the fact that when he gets up, he immediately falls to the ground. And he's like, still getting my land legs back. So obviously he's not been on land for very long. So that morning would be, we're assuming this morning, the 5th. Then we transition to him down at breakfast. So you would probably assume, just that based on the fact that we saw him getting up, now we see him at breakfast, that's probably the same morning as the 5th. There's not necessarily any very clear indicators. Like Steed was wearing his nightgown when he woke up, obviously, and now he is fully dressed while he is at breakfast. So there's not a clear connector there. But if we look at Steed throughout the day while he is wearing the same outfit, he does seem to be discovering a lot of basic new things around the house. Like he gets to see Mary's new studio. He meets her painting instructor. I'm sure he is also a great painting instructor. And we also has a conversation with his son, Lewis, where Lewis is like, "Who are you again?" Which, kids are weird. Maybe he did sit on that question for a couple days, but it kind of seems like something that you front load. That's a question you ask early on. So all this together does seem to imply that, yes, that this is still on the 5th, the day after he arrived. All the way to the end of the day where he hears some weird noises coming from Mary's studio, goes to take a peek and sees that Mary is in fact sleeping with Doug. So all that's happening on the 5th. Then we go to him again at the breakfast table. It's just him and Mary. He is wearing a different outfit. It looks very similar, but it is a different outfit. And he asks Mary, "Hey, you got in late last night. Anything you want to tell me about Doug?" Clearly referring to the fact what he saw, clearly fishing for information. So this must be the very next morning, right? So we were previously on the 5th. Must now be on the 6th. Mary does not want to share anything about Doug, but she does mention that her art show is tonight. This was not an invitation. She's just letting him know that she's not going to be home for dinner. So then we know that everything else that's happening up until the art show is all happening on that same day, which is again reinforced by him wearing the same outfit. He's wearing the same outfit through the art show to the next scene where he is still drunk. He was very drunk at the art show, still drunk, apologizing for being too drunk, for messing up her show. So that's all on the same day, the 6th. Then we do see Mary there. While Steed is kind of apologizing, she has a skewer in her hand. Is the skewer that she is going to use to try to stab Steed in the ear hole and kill him. And she's got a crazy look in her eye. So definitely pretty strong indication that there's a quick turnaround from there. She's going to try to kill him, maybe just in an hour or so when she's sure that he is fully asleep. Which is also reinforced by the fact that Mary does comment that she didn't want to wait to kill him. She wanted to get it done. So definitely killing him that same night. And this is ultimately really confirmed for us when they do have the fuckery where they're faking Steed's death, because during that, Steed very publicly announces that he's apologizing to his wife for making an ass of himself last night. Of course, referring to his behavior at her show. So if the faking his death is happening on the day after the show, then obviously the attempt to kill him happened on the night in between. So Mary's trying to kill Steed on the night of the 6th. Then Steed fakes his death on the day of the 7th. We can also assume that the 7th is when Steed actually leaves. We know it's happening during the golden hour, and presumably it's the golden hour of that same evening. It just doesn't really make sense otherwise. His fuckery faking his death ends with him in a carriage riding off. So you would just put the few things that he's bringing with him in the carriage and ride it straight to the ocean. Why would you risk like going back to the house to sleep and leave in the morning, like someone could see you. No, doesn't make sense. So obviously he leaves on that same evening of the 7th. And then the last thing that we see Steve do is he reunites with his crew. And again, he's not disheveled at all when he finds them. Like, it has to be at least a day later because it's full daytime when he sees them. But it was, evening lighting when he's leaving. So it has to be the next day. But and now remember, this guy only has one set of clothes now. So you would expect at least some wrinkles, some degree of grubbiness if this has been multiple days, right? So no, I think it's the very next day that he saves his crew. Switching back over to Ed's storyline, and we are going to actually start by starting at the end and working our way backwards. It just kind of flows better like that. So crew was saved on the 8th. When were they marooned? Probably on the 7th. The reason I think that is they are actually a little bit disheveled. Finally, someone is. But when we look at their facial hair doesn't look any longer. And especially I'm looking at the guys who don't normally have any. I don't see any scruff or anything. And obviously everyone grows facial hair at different rates, but you would think you would see something if they had been on the island for a couple of days. So I don't think it was very long, probably just the day before. We do see Buttons and Roach resorting to cannibalism, which you kind of don't actually, but they are planning on eating Swede. So normally you would think that, that's indicating a long time has passed. But it took Buttons all of 5 minutes an episode to bring up ooh, might have to eat each other. We're stuck on this island. So I think a day is probably realistic for him. So the crew marooned on the 7th. Obviously, right before they were marooned, they had to throw all Steve's stuff in the ocean. That's probably happening on the same day. There's 10 guys or something that are cleaning out this room. It's not going to take them that long. It's a big room, but it's not that big. And also they're just grabbing stuff and throwing it in the ocean, right? They're not packing it up. So yeah, that was probably only took maybe a couple hours tops. Probably on the same day that they were marooned, just because they seem pretty they're a little kind of weirded out by what's going on, but they don't seem hugely concerned at all. And we know they haven't seen Ed because we see Jim and Frenchie, the two that Ed does keep on his crew with him. We see them seeing Ed and they act with surprise. So they haven't seen him yet. So we know nobody has seen Ed. And if it's just been a morning that they haven't seen him, okay, it's a little weird, but we're not going to be super worried about it. But if it had been multiple days and Izzy is acting real strange, then that would be more of a red flag, right? So I think Steve's stuff was all gone, thrown away on the 7th, and then the crew was immediately marooned afterwards. So if that's happening on the 7th, then Ed going full Kraken is going to be happening and happens at night. So we're going to assume that probably happens the night before. Again, this couldn't have been too long because nobody's seen him. So presumably then on the evening of the 6th is when he pushes Lucius overboard and then goes and does his, makeup you would call it, and goes full Kraken. I think this is probably happening on the same day as that confrontation with Izzy, mostly because this Ed's kind of choice. Choice is maybe a strong word, but the fact that Ed ended up taking his trauma in this direction rather than the healing direction that he had been moving in is pretty direct in response to Izzy's confrontation and his threat. So it just doesn't seem like something that you would have had a lot of time elapsed between the two. It probably was happening on the same day. And I think that that also happened on the same day as when Ed was out singing for everyone. Because again, Izzy's confrontation is pretty direct in response to Ed going out and bearing his soul to everybody. And Izzy's not one to sit on things for a long time. And also we do have the crew up, on deck cheering for Ed, like, hey, come give us another song, which does make more sense if it hasn't been much time passed between, he was up there singing for them, walked back down to his quarters, was maybe down there for like 10-20 minutes, and then everyone's like, hey, actually, yeah, come back up, we want you to keep singing, kind of thing, right? Like that makes more sense than if this was like the next day or something and they're suddenly wanting another song and they're just yelling about it. So then that means that we have happening on the 6th for Ed is when he does his singing, confronted by Izzy, goes full Kraken, attempts to kill Lucius. One other thing that does happen on the 6th, which is not Ed, is we know that Jim returns the same time slightly before Ed goes out and does his singing, since Lucius does come to get Olu, and he finds both Olu and Jim. Then we have, moving backwards a little bit more, we have the conversation between Lucius and Ed when Ed is in the pillow fort. I do think that happened the day before, partially because we already have so much stuff happening for Ed on the 6th. But also because this does seem like maybe a conversation he kind of had to process a little bit more, think over a little bit more before he was really ready to move forward. And also we do know that he had to sort out, he wrote his lyrics already, but he had to sort out the music with Frenchie to go and perform it for everyone. So it does make sense that maybe he had the conversation with Lucius, kind of sat on that for a day before he was ready to go up and actually perform for everyone. And it can't have more than a day, because then we butt up against the 4th when he gets back. So moving with Ed's timeline starting at the beginning and moving forward now, that means Ed arrived back on the ship the morning of the 4th. Then on the morning of the 5th, so immediately he goes to his room, builds his pillow fort, locks himself up in there. Then the morning of the 5th, Izzy is like telling everyone like, don't worry about him, he's fine, we're just a little under, but he's in good spirits, great. But Lucius, please go talk to him. He wants to talk to you. Lucius and Ed have their conversation. At some point, obviously, Ed has a conversation with Frenchie. Then the next day, he goes up, he sings for everyone, then gets confronted and threatened by Izzy, then attempts to kill Lucius, does himself up like a Kraken, cuts Izzy's toe off. Then the next day has the crew throw all seed stuff away and then maroons the crew. And then, probably the same day that he's curled up in bed crying, or maybe it was the next day. Who's to say, really? But that is where we leave Ed. And my God, these boys had an eventful week. Remember, this stuff here is all over here. So Jack arrives the night of the 1st. So the day with Jack is the 2nd. And then Steve finding his crew is the 8th. Like, that is a week. These poor men, somebody please let them rest. They need a break. Oh my God. So there we are, though. There is our complete timeline. I think it's pretty clear, right? Pretty straightforward, at least as straight as the show is. So here we go. And I had a real fun time putting it together. Hopefully y'all had a fun time listening to me ramble. If there's anything like you think I forgot, anything you disagree with, anything you just want to comment on whatsoever, feel free to leave a comment. And then if you guys like this, and if hopefully season 2 is just as weird and crazy as this season was, maybe we can come back next season. But in the meantime, thank you for anyone who stuck with me all the way through this, what I'm sure is going to be a very, very long video. And, I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. I will see you when I see you. Bye.